interesting for us to say something for Bulgarian readers. Just something as a dedication or, for example, to reveal some more about the third volume of Stalin biography.
I'm thrilled to be here in Sofia. Thank you so much for meeting me, and thank you, of course, for the translation, for all the beautiful hard work that you've done. Of course, many Bulgarian readers, they know the history because they lived through this period, but the young people, of course, they didn't live through it. So for them, maybe
They have to be explained more detailed.
Yes, it requires that they do some reading and research. The first two volumes that you translated took me a long time to research and write.
They're remarkable work, really.
Well, thank you. I try to be definitive. I try to write a book which is not just for now, but for
the future
5
generations.
years and 10 years and 20 years that people can still read it. The third volume is even more difficult than the first two. I thought the first one was impossible, but I did it. The second one was much more difficult than the first one. And now the third one is even more difficult than the other two.
But you will do it, I'm sure.
I'm about halfway. I have 7 of the 14 chapters. Each chapter is 25,000 words. So each chapter is just like these, a short book for each chapter. Right now, I'm in the period of the Chinese Revolution and Mao Zedong and Mao's relationship with Stalin, and then the Korean War. So that's the part that I'm working on right now at Stanford University. So I think we're still a few more years to go. So I'm sorry for those who are impatient, but
They have to wait.
I'm very grateful that I have readers who are waiting for the book, and I will not let you down.
I'm sure about that.
Okay.
Do you think there will be a special chapter dedicated to Bulgaria and Bulgarian part in the history with in association with Russia?
Yes, of course. Bulgaria must feature in the book. It is about World War II and the Cold War. There are lots of meetings. As you know, Dimitrov was Bulgarian. Of course, the machinations with Yugoslavia about possible federation. The founding of the communist regime here in Bulgaria. All of that is part of Volume 3, yes.
What would you say, for example, for the young generations? Recently, there was a big monument of Soviet army that was removed in the center of Sofia, and there were huge debates. Should it be removed or should it stay? And some people say that it should be removed because it reminds of a bad period of our history. Other people say that it should stay because it should remind that period of Bulgarian history. So what's your opinion in such a debate?
Both are correct.
Yeah?
This is something for the Bulgarian people to decide how to manage their history. It's a correct argument that the Soviet occupation regime and the difficulties that that Bulgaria had to endure all those years are hard to remember for people, especially those who lived through them. At the same time, if you don't remember your history, then you don't know not only where you were, but where you are going.
And we are going to repeat it, most probably.
So it's necessary both to be cautious about celebrating, but also to remember in a way that's appropriate. You know, from the period Byzantium, then the Ottoman Empire, every new time something changes, they destroy all the old. And then you lose it.
Of course.
And you need to restore it in order to remember it, and not necessarily to celebrate, not necessarily to validate what happened, but certainly to remember it. So appropriate remembrance is the way I would describe it. So not everywhere, maybe not in the most important places, because Bulgaria wants to build on a different history for the future. But in some places, it's appropriate, in my view, to remember this past. And it's a healthy debate for the society to have.
Always.
Very healthy to be able to have this debate is an achievement of 1989.
Yeah, sure.
So I'm all in favor of remembering the past, but in ways that fit the future and the building of the future of the current Bulgarian.
You mentioned building of the future. How do you see the future that post-communist countries can build for themselves?
So if you were here 30 years ago, there was euphoria.
Yeah.
The
I was here, yes. I was very young, but I was here.
The change in 1989, 1990, there was euphoria. So naturally there is some disappointment because it did not turn out as fantastic as people hoped it would. That disappointment is natural, and we don't have to punish people for being disappointed. The euphoria was natural and the disappointment is natural. So if you don't take 1989, 1990 as the starting point, what if you take in 1975 or 1965 or 1900? Then where Bulgaria is going can be looked at in a much more positive light. That doesn't mean the future is guaranteed. The future will be made by the Bulgarian people themselves. So many are outside the country. This is a challenge. But if you build a future here, they will want to come back. Not all of them, but many of them. So even though it looks like you've lost them, they are acquiring skills and building businesses. They have all sorts of talent and assets that are available for Bulgaria to also develop if it's attractive for them what's going on here. So the future is yet to be decided, and it could be quite positive, maybe not as fantastic as 1989 euphoria, but still a positive. Bulgaria is part of European Union. This is an enormous achievement. Who would think that Bulgaria would be part of European Union?
At that time, no one.
Some people maybe imagine, in the dreams, but for the most part, it was inaccessible. Now it's a reality, but it needs to be built. Cannot be taken for granted. It's on the Bulgarian people themselves to take full advantage of this membership in the European Union and to provide opportunity here at home. Today, Europe lives under uncertainty, politics stalemated, lots of noise and anger with the social media. Compared to much of the rest of Europe, Bulgaria looks more normal now than many other places in Europe. Again, disappointment if you lived here through the changes. We understand that. But compared to what could have been, it's much better. And therefore, in the future, it could be better, but that's not a given. That's up to all of
that's right. But many people are afraid to build their own future here because we are so close to Ukraine, all those
Of course.
things that happen there, scaring people here. So how can
There
we
is NATO.
Of course, but
So far,
NATO, but the truth is that the most of the Bulgarians are pro-Russia. I hope
Yes.
you know this.
yes, there's a strong current of pro-Russian sentiment in Bulgaria. Again, it's a free society. To understand that people are free to choose. However, being inside NATO and having the protection of NATO is a major achievement for Bulgarian security. So far, we see the tragedy in Ukraine that President Putin and other members of the Russian elite, they don't attack NATO facilities, NATO
right, yeah.
countries. They only attack Ukraine, which is not in NATO. So this is not a guarantee that Putin will not change his policy, but so far we see that he is deterred from attacking by NATO. NATO countries are much stronger than Russia, and unfortunately, Ukraine is suffering on the front lines of this. But if NATO stays strong vis-a-vis Russia, so far very strong, new members, Sweden and Finland. If NATO stays strong, this deterrence of Russian aggression towards NATO countries will continue. The longer-term challenge is what relationship Europe will have with Russia. You cannot remove Russia from the map.
Yeah.
It's not going to leave from where it is. Russian state has collapsed 2 times in the past 110 years.
It always came back.
It came back, and it came back in very similar ways. So we cannot assume that Russia will vanish and our problems will be solved. We need to figure out what is an appropriate relationship with Russia so that it is deterred from aggression, but at the same time can participate in a stabilizing relationship with you. This is much more difficult now because of the aggression against
Yes.
Ukraine, and also because there are new countries in the European Union and NATO which are not pro-Russian. Now there is Poland, Estonia,
Hungary.
Latvia, Lithuania. And so for Russia to come back in some way into a relationship with Europe is much, much more difficult than ever in history. Because even if Russia became democratic, Poland would remain suspicious of Russia. And so Russia is not democratic. But even if it became a non-aggressive democratic rule of law country, the Baltic states and Poland would remain very skeptical about relationship with Russia. So Russia's path to stabilization has been made much more difficult by Russia. They burn the bridges to Europe, and then they accuse the Europeans of the arson.
Yes, but they maybe rely on the support of China and all the other countries outside Europe that...
Of course they do.
BRICS.
Of course they do. But those countries don't have the capabilities that the richer, freer Western countries have. You know, if you're the Chinese regime, you're afraid of your people. That's why you have censorship. That regime is afraid of its own people. So you predict which countries will last longer with the current governments that they have. The ones that are afraid of their people, or the ones that govern with the consent of their people. You know, so it looks now like it's very threatening, of course, especially like in Bulgaria, if you live neighbors,
Yeah,
you
sure.
live close by the war zone. So, of course, it looks very threatening, but you have to remember that BRIC countries are dependent on West for technology transfer, for all sorts of investment, and for the stable governance, rule of law that their business elites use. One of the strangest things about the Russian elites is that all the years before February 2022, when they were criticizing, bashing Western countries, they own property there. Their children go to school there. Their whole life is oriented there. In the Chinese case, they are criticizing United States, they are bashing United States, and they want to send their children to United States for education. They want to keep their assets safe in United States banks, not in Chinese banks, because they're afraid of Chinese communist regime. So this is not to say that the future is easy, or that all of these regimes will collapse, or that we just have to wait and history moves in our direction. It's up to us to make sure that we're strong, that we invest in our young people, that we expand human capital, the education system, that we build the infrastructure, that we have the partnerships with allies and friends and anyone else who's got the same values, free country. So it's okay to have debate inside Bulgaria of what type of orientation is appropriate. What's not okay is subversion where you do information warfare underground, where you're using the social media and the cyber warfare to undermine, subvert Bulgarian society. This must be prevented. But open debate should not be prevented, and we shouldn't be afraid of it, because we have the values, the institutions, the technology, the economic dynamism, and the freedom. And so let's not be afraid of our advantages. Let's remember them. And if we do, we invest in them. We've done this before. In the case of Bulgaria, how did it happen 1989? Was it like a hurricane? Was it like earthquake? Was it accident of nature? Or was there a policy of Cold War and containment to stand up to the Soviet Union? There was a strong policy for decade after decade after decade, and the policy worked. The Soviet regime imploded. So it can be done. If we're afraid, if we forget our advantages, if we don't invest in ourselves, then of course we're in trouble. But there's no reason we should behave stupidly. We should behave intelligently. It can be done. We did it already before. No guarantee, but we know how to do it. And so the world looks very threatening. Again, I agree with you. But I see tremendous advantages and strengths and a brighter future that's possible.
Do you think that future will be achieved through war necessarily? Do you think war is inevitable?
Nothing is inevitable. Everything is a choice and a decision. All wars are choices made by leaders to start the war. So if you are afraid of me, or I am afraid of you, I might not start a war with you because I'm afraid I will lose.
But this deterrent will work up to what time period? Like up to a certain point?
It works as long as you are continuing to strengthen it. And then when the war happens, if it happens, very unfortunate, war is always a tragedy, but you must be ready for it. Look at the Ukrainians. Everyone said, could never stand up to the Russians. Well, they have stood up to the Russians for quite some time now, 2.5 years.
With outside help?
Yeah, well,
On their own.
everybody has this outside help. If they're in NATO, Ukraine is not even a member of NATO yet, they get the outside help. So, of course, I understand the anxiety. And nobody wants war. War is always tragic. Even when you win, it's very costly, let alone when you lose. So war is a failure. It's a failure even on the side that gets attacked because they were insufficient in deterring. So let us hope that we are better and smarter and we can prevent the outbreak of war. But let us also make sure that we are ready for war, because when you are ready for war, you have higher chance to prevent war.
Do you think Stalin's shadow is still hanging in our everyday life in any
Forever.
forever? It will be
Both words, I mean West and East.
Forever. Well, he will never go away completely. The imprint is so vast. It's just like Mao. It's just like Hitler. Those are the three people who shadow us now.
how many generations?
For every generation. But to shadow doesn't mean to threaten. You said the monuments to
Yeah.
remember.
Mhm.
This is a shadow also. This is also a shadow. The shadow can be threatening if it's backed up by something today. Or it can just be galvanizing. It can make you say, not again. We won't let this happen again. We will be smarter, better, more prepared. We will understand how it could happen to prevent it from happening again. So the shadow can be educational. The shadow can be beneficial even. Of course, the history was terrible. Nobody wants the history to repeat. But this is the meaning of the shadow in some ways. When you read these books about Stalin, you understand how serious this was.
Yes.
You understand the scale. 18 to 20 million people killed by Stalin. This is not something that is normal, and it's not something we want to see again. With the Putin regime, it's an evil regime. It's a criminal regime. But it's not the Stalin regime. It's not even close to the Stalin regime.
So he's not using his methods in his politics.
This is nothing compared to Stalin. What Stalin did, he enslaved the peasants, the farmers, across all of Eurasia. Unbelievable that he did that. Putin can't do anything like that, fortunately, even if he wanted to. But he doesn't want to. He doesn't want to enslave the peasantry. So, again, it's a criminal regime. It has violated international law. He has been indicted in the International Criminal Court. But we have to be careful. Just because he sits in the same building, the Imperial Senate of Catherine the Great inside the Kremlin, just because his office is in the same building, and just because there are some similarities, we cannot imagine that it's going to possibly be on this scale again, the Stalin scale.
Have you been ever invited in Russia to, for example, to
present this
present the book?
The
Or
book is available in Russian translation, and I have received many, many responses from Russian readers, including from the Russian government, which read the book. And for once, they discovered the real history. And so they were quite interested in the book. They give a false Stalin in the propaganda,
yeah.
but the real Stalin is interesting to them. But anyway,
good.
I'm so happy to be here.
Okay,
We're-
Thank
it's a
you
pleasure
again.
for us.
And